Hello and welcome to this Fireside chat of the Center on Regulation and Markets at the Brookings Institution. My name is Sanjay Patnaik and I'm the director of the center. In this series of conversations, we explore important topics related to modern-day markets and regulations in conversations with regulators, business executives, and academics. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome Commissioner Genevieve Shiroma from the California Public Utilities Commission. She was appointed in January 2019, and before that, she served as a member of the Agricultural Labor Relations Board, and she was the chief of the Air Quality Branch at the California Air Resources Board. She also was the elected director of Ward 4 of the Sacramento Municipal Utility District until 2018. Commissioner Shiroma resides in Sacramento and holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Materials Science and Engineering from the University of California, Davis. Commissioner Shiroma, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjay. Very pleased to share some information about the CPUC with your viewing audience.
Thank you very much. So today I thought we can explore important regulatory issues related to ride sharing and autonomous vehicles in California. California really has been at the forefront of many regulatory initiatives in the United States. And so I thought we could start with a brief overview of your work. What major regulatory areas and topics are you currently working on at the CPUC, and what areas fall under the general jurisdiction of the Commission? Please.
Okay, well, thank you. We have a lot going on, as you imagine. The CPUC started back in 1911 when we were the Railroad Commission, and we have since evolved into the commission that regulates energy, electricity and gas, water, communications, and transportation. And when the pandemic hit earlier this year, we really worked hard to not skip a beat. Immediately going to substantial working from home, keeping all of our proceedings on pace, including our transportation network company proceedings on pace, and continuing to hold all of our voting meetings. And so to be more specific about transportation, again, with that over 100-year history, we are authorized to regulate many things. Safety and oversight for the for-hire passenger carriers, limousines, airport shuttles, charter and scheduled bus operators. If you travel in California, if you are using any of these types of mode of transportation, they are regulated by the CPUC. And of course, transportation network companies and autonomous vehicles. We also, if you're familiar with California, we've got a number of bays and sea venues. And so the majority of the 20 licensed operators that conduct the ferry services in the San Francisco Bay and also that provide cross-channel transportation, including goods transportation between Southern California and Santa Catalina Island, are also regulated by the CPUC. We are focusing a lot on heavy rail, light rail, also on the high-speed rail, and then more recently and specifically assigned to my office, the transportation network company activities.
Great, thank you. This is a broad diversity of areas that you're working on. Related to the later one, I'm curious. So you mentioned that you also work on transportation network companies, and this falls within your jurisdiction. I'm curious, where does the Commission derive its authority to regulate those companies from?
There is a regulatory authority right in the California Constitution. It was added in 2013. It's Article 12. It's called the Passenger Charter Party Carriers Act and the California Public Utilities Code. It comes right from the statute. At the Commission, we tend not to insert authority where we don't have authority. Mm-hmm. We have plenty to do with the authority that we have. So it comes right there from the law itself.
Okay, great.
Since 2013.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And my next question relates to kind of like the role and function of regulators and regulations, right? So according to the public's interest theory, regulations are usually introduced to correct some kind of market failure. And so I'm curious, can you give us an example of market failures that the CPUC has identified and addressed, especially as it relates to ride sharing in California?
Sure, sure. We have to admit when we're wrong, and because overriding everything is safety.
Mm-hmm.
In any of these regulated entities, the foremost is safety. Of course, cost effectiveness, affordability, these kinds of things. And so early on, we identified various safety requirements, but found that there were passengers getting into the wrong cars.
Oh, interesting.
Not recognizing that they were not getting into your Uber or Lyft or what have you. And so we corrected this in a 2016 decision that required the clear labeling of the cars. And you see the branding, of the cars, so that passengers are able to clearly recognize, and then also the sharing of license plate numbers with passengers, the communication that occurs between driver and passenger, because also for the driver, we are concerned about their safety as well. Those are some of the more recent changes that occurred.
That's very interesting. So you saw that kind of like information asymmetry between riders and passengers, and you were able to get that with the labeling regulations. That's interesting.
That's right. Yeah.
My next question really relates to also a bit to my own work, and it's always of interest to me, which is one aspect of regulators is that one has to be careful that there is no regulatory capture, right? That regulators and companies are not too close with each other. And we have seen examples in the past where that can go wrong. And so I'm curious, how does the CPUC make sure that it is not unduly influenced by regulated companies, while still being able to get all the information that you need from the firms to be able to make good regulatory decisions?
Yes, and this is always a quest that must never stop.
I can imagine.
Insofar as, folks may bandy about the word transparent a lot. It does have meaning. And the thing that I've come to realize at the CPUC upon joining it back in January of 2019 is that the sheer amount of procedural elements of what goes into the docket, what is allowed in the docket, who is allowed to speak, the reporting that the commissioners must make. We have, of course, rules of practice and procedure. They're derived, again, from the law, lays out specific rules on communications with decision makers. If folks want to talk to me, they have to fill out a meeting request form. They have to indicate, is it a meet and greet? Is it an ex parte? Same thing with the staff. We are all required to receive ethics training from our legal department. There are strict reporting requirements on any gifts that are received. There are limits on gifts. We are very much like a court in terms of the docketing of all the materials. And so we have provided more opportunities for members of the public to weigh in. We have these things called public participation hearings, so that we're not only hearing from the stakeholders and the parties, the applicants before us, we're also hearing from the public that they are affecting. And especially when we are working on general rate cases for companies. Also workshops and any of these things, we may have a court reporter there. I think all of these things really work to provide that one, there is a trail on the commissioners like myself, our activities. There is a clear record that we are basing our decisions on. And of course, then there's also the ability of parties to sue us if they want to. our decisions to the district courts of appeals and the courts of the Supreme Court.
Okay.
So with all those things in place, we feel pretty confident that the public trust is there.
That sounds great. So you seem to have a lot of checks and balances to make sure that it's independent. Great.
Yes.
So let me pivot a little bit to kind of like the regulatory areas that you're working on. I'm curious, if you look at the landscape in California, what are some of the largest regulatory challenges that you see that the CPUC is currently facing?
Well, for autonomous vehicles, I mean, I could mention wildfires, climate change.
Sure, I can imagine.
All of these are really a similar order of magnitude. You know, with autonomous vehicles, it is a new arena. It is a new technology, and we are a data-driven organization. We are a risk-based organization in terms of melding the data that we are receiving, the testing that we allow, and how then do we translate that into the commercialization of this particular activity, and with this is brand new. I mean, it's not as though we've had analogous types of data sets to look at. So all along the way, as there is a hunger, you know, for this kind of tool, and an excitement for it, is to just methodically lay out, here's how we are going to approach this. Here's how we will start with pilot programs, testing, how much testing, what sort of statistical needs do we have. These things are always difficult in an environment when there is that hunger and the urge, let's get this done now. We want this tool now, we want to deploy now. And then also we are not the only authority over this program. There are others, the Department of Motor Vehicles and others. And so it's important to in concert with these sister agencies. And it's not that that's a challenge, but it's just an important step when you've got various teams to assure that we're not siloed.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine, yeah. Which is good that you're also cooperating, I think.
Yes.
So the next question really relates to kind of like the intersection of markets and regulations. Because if we look at today's economy, we can see that innovation and new business models and markets, they emerge much more rapidly than they used to in the past. And so I was wondering about, how do you make sure as a regulator how to keep up with these newest market developments and adjust your regulations to new industries dynamically, right, as these new technologies, these new markets emerge?
Right. I mean, after all, we're a state agency. I'm sure there are many notions about what that means. Are we simply looking at paper, or are we getting out there and talking with people? And it's really all of the above. Our team keeps apace with the associations. The companies, of course, are required to receive authorization, you know, from us through some of the conferences and through the companies themselves and other states, looking at what other states are doing. We can keep a pace, but I'm a firm believer too that something as simple as visiting the companies, looking at their operations. Pardon me, some companies are building their own vehicles, others are partnering with existing manufacturers. And I myself have gone for a couple of test drives.
Oh, great. That's interesting.
Yes, to actually see the equipment at work, to see, both of these experiences were in San Francisco and in Santa Clara County. Mm-hmm. And if you've driven in San Francisco, it is one of the most complicated cities to drive in because of the elevation of some of those hills, some of the very narrow roads, very crowded streets. So for our team, it really is all the above. And, and information technology and the software, understanding those platforms as well is very important.
Oh, that's really interesting. So that you're even going on the ground and in the field. That's wonderful.
Yes.
Actually, let me pick up on the last one, the autonomous vehicles, right? Because this is a big area, and as you mentioned, is one of the biggest areas you're working on. These are really expected to play an essential role in the transportation industry of the future. And so I'm curious, what major areas of AV regulations are you working on within the CPUC? And I do think you have a proposed decision currently that will be coming down the line soon, and I've read the text. It's very interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and what kind of components are part of that proposed decision to regulate AVs.
Yes, indeed. I mean, we've done the backdrop of safety for transportation network companies, wheelchair accessibility, for equity, so that there is equity for folks who are wheelchair bound, who have disabilities, and then our latest proposed decision is on autonomous vehicles. It all leads back to the statute authorization for us. This is a major piece. It will have big paradigm shifting impacts, on our society. Our role is to provide for that safe framework, cost-effective framework. And so there is a proposed decision out on the street now. It's poised for a vote in mid-November. Folks are weighing in. It was developed with as much input as we could, pull in from not only the companies, of course, the transportation agencies, the local governments are very, very keenly interested in this because they have their local regional transits and transportation networks, and how will this affect that? Safety, and in and around that, there is of course, the experience and data from the pilot programs, and in this proposed decision, we are authorizing both drivered and driverless and shared driving. Oftentimes, what happens is it is incumbent upon the company that wants to enter this business, wants to operate in this arena, that company is going to be required to submit what we call advice letters, safety plans, outlining in great detail what they are going to do to provide for things such as information on pickups, drop-offs, miles traveled, tracking complaints, what are the safety features should someone need help, how quickly will help arrive, and again, this is a new, definitely a new arena for us, but our view is that the team has put together every possible thing that we know of for the safety of the passengers, also the safety of the vehicle, if it's covered, the safety of the staff that is in that vehicle as well. So I think, long story short, Sanjay, is a lot of this is going to be geared towards those safety plans that are submitted by the companies to our team. We hope we have provided sufficient frameworks so that it's not experimenting on which rock they're supposed to be submitting to us towards success.
That sounds exciting, and I would imagine also challenging because it's so new technology, right? So many new things that are coming down the line. And you touched upon this already a little bit related to safety, right? So I think the interesting part is that California really has been at the forefront of these companies testing AVs on the streets. You see these pictures of the cars going around, and so I'm curious, what regulatory challenges have you seen so far as a result of these road tests, these real practical implementation tests?
Well, I think it is between ourselves and the Department of Motor Vehicles. really becoming familiar with the technology, the LiDAR, the radar, the cameras, the all of the mapping, that is done. It is really quite phenomenal. The ability of this equipment to determine if there are vehicles, if there are people crossing the street, if there is something that is blocking the way and you don't know what's beyond it, the features of all of the backup systems, and so I think the challenge is that again, between the Department of Motor Vehicles and ourselves to really assure that the manufacturer testing has been done for the safety of the vehicles, that all of these mapping attributes, real-time, split-second pieces of information for the vehicle to recognize. Again, that redundancy in terms of you still need people. Okay, there still has to be people there. Yeah. It's interesting because people are the redundancy in this case.
It's usually the other way around, right?
Right, exactly, yeah. Exactly. And then all of that is operating smoothly, and that our regulations have captured that for a viable system and a safe system. So it's a little bit nerve-wracking, but with this proposed decision, we are really confident and looking forward to having gotten it right out to go. But it's still going under comments. We don't have a vote, so we have to see what all of the interested parties have to say about it.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you decide at the Commission whether an AV system is safe for road testing and subsequently for regular use on the road? What kind of criteria do you look at?
The pilots that conducted.
Okay.
And it's not only the pilots, that are in California. That there is information to be garnered from other states, from other countries. Also, ultimately, the way that the statute and the laws are set up, the Department of Motor Vehicles is the one that ultimately determines if the companies are conducting their business safely. We, of course, dovetail with our sister agency. Again, it really has to be data-driven, and having our teams between the Department of Motor Vehicles and the CPUC, that our teams have a keen knowledge of the technology that's being used, that we can't just take it on faith, that we really have a keen knowledge, a drill down into it to understand it, and that coupled with the testing, and then a keen knowledge of the mapping of the streets for the areas these vehicles are going to be used.
Okay.
That the mapping of the streets, and because that has to be so granular that that vehicle knows exactly all of the conditions, and because they are delivering people from one point to another, maybe goods from one point to another. It is massive, amazing, and as I say, the confidence of we 5 commissioners that the staff have done the due diligence work, and that they have worked in concert with the DMV, and that they have put together a workable framework for these companies.
That's interesting, and I would imagine that probably requires a lot of capacity and knowledge building at the Commission to kind of really dive into these technical details.
Yes, the team is pretty phenomenal and very dedicated. Yes.
Well, that sounds great. And how do you, once the streets, let's say they get to operate on the streets regularly, those AVs, once they've gotten permission, how do you make sure that they're safe and reliable once they're there? Do you gather regular data? Are you required, or do you ask the companies to submit data to you
Yep.
so that you can assess on an ongoing basis how is it going?
Yes. Yep. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And we are familiar with this kind of data gathering and the massive amounts of data involved, because in our energy field and the smart grid and the smart meters, which collect a lot of information, and along with that are privacy requirements and trade secret requirements and so forth. Yes, that data collection is essential. And the thing about this platform is all that data is going to be there. And we will be able to work with the companies on any kinds of fine tunings, along the way too. We in a perfect world, we would have no incidences, we would have no complaints. However, we're melding the mechanical with the human, and so there is reporting on comments, complaints, all towards assuring safety, and also providing for the ability for folks who have visual impairments, mobility impairments, to be able to use this new tool as well.
Yeah, I think that's also very important. I'm glad that you guys are working on this. Actually, related to the later point, maybe we can move a little bit to the transportation network companies, or ride-sharing companies, as they're also called. So I'm curious, because in one of your recent rulings, you posed some questions about TNC regulation, including the level of granularity at which TNC should report data, share data with government entities, for instance, on transportation of minors, vehicle safety, and the treatment of autonomous vehicles. Could you let me maybe know and highlight the data points that you think are most important for regulators to have in order to regulate TNCs meaningfully?
Yeah. I mean, things like, and again, anonymized information. There are long-time criteria for protecting privacy, what have you, but to have those pick up and drop off locations, the total miles traveled, the vehicle occupancy, wheelchair accessible rides requested and offered, the number of complaints, incidences, we need to know the company's plans to, continue to engage with disability advocates, disadvantaged communities. Now, we layered over this, and I think we can speak to this further. Cars continue to emit air pollution. We have electric vehicles. That's a different different situation. Electric vehicles still need to be recharged. One needs to know, well, what is the source of the charging? What is the power mix of that? And so, but overall, these data in terms of such granularity as vehicle miles traveled, points, all of this also it helps to inform the local governments to assure. I mean, local governments are responsible for providing for accessibility for people who overall are the low-income communities, disabled communities, people who need to get to work, people who need to get to grocery stores, to provide for that mobility for society. And so these data help to inform. Maybe there are particular neighborhoods that tend to use more of this TNC tool than others. And so what does that mean for the prioritization of other modes of transportation? Maybe it will inform the even something as simple as the availability of parking
Yeah.
in the new developments. I mean, here in Sacramento, developers are looking at patterns outside of transportation network company activity, but they're looking at patterns of homeowners and what they use for transportation. And does that mean you actually offer a parking spot for every, or 2 parking spots for every new apartment, or you? So all these things, all of these things come into play. Now, again, for the CPUC and for the DMV, it substantially it is a safety attribute of this. Now, also in around this, I mentioned privacy and data security, and so we are providing requirements, regulations, and guidance to the companies on how the commission protects that data, but also how do we again interface with local government, because none of this works in isolation. The whether it's Los Angeles, whether it's the airports, whether it's Sacramento, the local entities have all sorts of traffic control requirements, traffic flow requirements, and we are part of that rubric. So let's see. Why don't I stop there and let you ask your
this is great
conversation.
And I think your last point was especially interesting, because I think one concern people have is if the government collects data like this, right? Like, how do you ensure the data security and the privacy, since a lot of that is very granular data? But it's good that you're taking measures like anonymization and making sure that this data is really safe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. And so another question I had is that relates to something that you had mentioned earlier, which is kind of like accessibility, right? Especially for people with disabilities. And so I'm curious, in 2018, the California legislature passed the TNC Access for All Act, which is for transportation networking companies. And so I'm curious, how does this legislation make ride sharing more accessible for people with disabilities?
Okay, yes. So the first thing that we did was to issue a decision to collect the fees. In order to program, it has to be supported. So since July 1st of 2019, a little over a year ago, anyone who is using a TNC, for each trip, there's a 10-cent fee. Again, do we ever look at we look at the total amount that we're paying? Do we look at all these? Some people do. Anyway, there is a 10-cent fee per trip. Pardon me, we could expand the on-demand transportation for non-folding wheelchair users. There are folks who may have a walker or what have you, but this is for folks who cannot fold their wheelchairs. Now, after we authorized the fund, then we also established some requirements this past March on how to distribute those funds to provide for the options to support the operations, the vehicles, and so forth. And that just was issued this past March. We are continuing to hold some virtual workshops. I mean, to deploy this in California, do you put it in the hands of folks who have familiarity, the paratransit and so forth, the local governments, or some brand new entity? We are relying upon folks who have experience in working with people who need that kind of help. But meanwhile, as far as and how those funds go out to if TNCs have designated programs, then how does that money get distributed to them to support their programs, and then also to continue to collect the data. So what I would say overall is, in this program, yes, we have provided for the financial support of it. We've provided the initial framework for distribution of those monies. It is still a work in progress, because this is October We issued that decision this past March, and time will tell if we need to make some adjustments or not.
So that's interesting. So do you provide funds directly to transportation network companies for programs that foster accessibility?
If we are going through the local governments who have that experience, pardon me, to provide the funding directly to the transportation network companies who've got some programs going on. And we have, the answer is yes, through the experts, okay?
Okay.
We have tasked these companies to provide the same kind of service that someone who doesn't need a wheelchair.
I see. Okay.
And that is, that is the stretch requirement. Okay? In California, the folks who have disabilities have rights for the same kinds of services. And so the companies are working, and what that comes down to is you've got the vehicle that can take the non-folding wheelchair, and that the customer receives a response time similar to what any of the rest of us would receive. And so I think this is an area where we're still collecting information. The companies are still working on this. I don't have a definitive answer today on how that's working.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's really both the assets and also the technology. Okay. Oh, great.
Yeah, these are requirements we've established.
Great. So then let's move maybe to another topic, which is close to my own interest, which is climate change, right? So my work is on climate change, and California obviously has been affected a lot with the recent wildfires, which has been exacerbated by climate change. And so I'm curious, in 2018, the California legislature passed the Green Mile Standard. And so I'm curious if you can maybe talk a little bit about how this bill will help the transportation sector and TNCs reduce greenhouse gases.
Yes, we're in the data gathering stage. So, and indeed that statute recognized that and again, we're in a pandemic right now, with of course the notion that at some point, hopefully sooner than later, the public health folks will garner the tools for getting back to normal, whatever that is going to be. Meantime, okay, that's not going to happen. I mean, anecdotally, when I'm out and about in Sacramento, I am one. I wear a mask before I go to the grocery store. I am observing as the governor is and the Department of Health is slowly providing for reopening. Restaurants can have 25% capacity. So I'm telling you, the traffic, it is almost to normal.
Really? Wow. Okay.
On the streets, and on the highways. I'm talking Sacramento. Okay. Yeah. All right. So to your point about SB 1014, the Green Mile Standard, it does require that we work with the Air Resources Board on coming up with measures to reduce the greenhouse gases. There are a lot of air pollution requirements from TNCs. So at this point, the Air Resources Board has been conducting a lot of inventorying, studying to estimate, well, what is the universe of the greenhouse gas contribution from TNCs. And what they have found is that, and air pollution, overall, but greenhouse gases. What they have found, interestingly, is that TNC vehicles emit about 50% more greenhouse gas emissions than non-TNC vehicles, which is
that's interesting.
Pretty phenomenal. Maybe it's the age of the vehicles. Now, and meanwhile, TNCs What they have also found is that CNCs make up about 2.5% of the vehicle population.
Okay.
That, of course, it was growing, and we anticipate that it will continue to grow.
Mm-hmm.
It is, and the customer is going to want what they want.
Right.
This is driven by the customers, right?
And by market, right?
The market. That's right. That's right. So at this point, we do know, yeah, there that 50% figure is eye-opening.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't realize
Yeah,
that.
and so we we are needing to let the Air Resources Board continue to finish their work on
Mm-hmm.
the data, and then we'll need to work in concert with them on what sorts of new requirements might there be. Now, the Air Resources Board has the authority over the vehicles and the fuels of vehicles and so forth. What we have, of course, is the whole transportation and electrification. If we are heading towards the notion of electric vehicles and a transition to that, we don't know yet, and I don't want to put the cart before us. But everyone knows, of course, this is foremost on our minds. And what does that mean? And what does that mean for the people using their own vehicles and so forth? And time will certainly tell on that. We have this whole other massive effort also required by statute in electrification. And what does that mean? It means charging stations.
Mm-hmm.
And those charging stations that are connected to the electrical grid. And we just authorized a pretty large program for the Southern California Edison area on this to install fast charging, regular charging, multifamily, government, businesses, all towards just adding to the network. So if we're going to have a wide deployment of electric vehicles, we need to have means for them to recharge. And
yeah, that's interesting. So that's part of
timely.
it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Sanjay, we aren't poised to issue some sort of proposed decision on it. It is still work in progress.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I mean, the bill has been pretty recent, so I understand.
Yeah.
The final question I had is kind of like going back to what you had mentioned a bit earlier, which is that we are currently in the coronavirus crisis, right? None of us really know how long it is going to last. And I'm curious how the crisis has affected the work you do at the CPUC, if at all, and if you see major long-term changes in industries and markets as a result of the COVID crisis, right? That might require you to adjust your regulatory approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Big impact.
I can imagine.
Big impact insofar as, and I'm really pleased to say that, and what I mean by that is we had to be nimble, and we were, because in terms of safety, let's say for the transportation network companies, it comes right down to the passenger safety, the employee safety. And so whether it was transportation network companies or passenger rail or charter party carriers and so forth, the key thing was to make sure that we were trued up with the California Department of Health requirements, the Center for Disease Control, to assure that information was getting out, those requirements getting out as far as disinfecting surfaces, how frequently you disinfect, wearing face coverings, allowing the cancellation of trips if the driver is not wearing a mask, if the passenger is not wearing a mask. Also providing for some financial relief in terms of extending the suspension period of a carrier's operating authority prior to revocation. There are any number of reasons why a carrier may be in danger of having its operating authority being yanked, and really looking through those things as far as how the pandemic may be affecting their ability to renew, reconcile, and so forth. Also waiving there's a $125 fee for reinstating a permit if revoked, and we have waived that temporarily.
Oh, okay.
That can really help folks. We also said that, look, when California is a big place, a lot of local jurisdictions, the state, us, and that whichever has the more restrictive requirement, that they are to follow that more restrictive requirement rather than just cherry picking, what they need to comply with. And so whether it's the TNCs, whether it's the subway systems, we've got the LA system, the BART system, we've got light rail, so forth. All of these entities are required to follow these basic COVID pandemic requirements. Now, beyond that, we also, and the governor quickly acted on things like, let's say, for electricity, gas, water, moratoriums on disconnections. Much of the moratoriums go until April of 2021. The states, our National Association of Regulatory Utilities Commissions, NABRUC, they have a website link there which shows all of the states and all of the moratoriums, how long they last, and so forth.
Oh, interesting. So that people can have access to the utilities even if they can't afford it.
That's right. That's right. Oh, now, again, it's not a bailout. It is a moratorium. We've also have in the works working with the utilities on what do the repayment plans look like once moratoriums are lifted. We are continuing to look at are there other things we can do. We've got some workshops coming up both in water and energy. On the communications front as well, we oversee the discount program for phone service, and we've got some also some relief there as well, and also getting the word out to a lot of folks who are unemployed that there are discount programs for your energy bills. There are discount programs for your phone bills. We just issued a decision on what's called our Lifeline program, again, a discount for phone service. And that includes a mobile device. It started off with landlines decades ago, in addition to wireless and so forth. And whether it's your TNC driver or what have you, you can qualify for this. And we just issued a decision that provides for providers offering broadband as well. Broadband, and also an affordable broadband with certain numbers of gigs of data and what have you. So, we look at that in terms of the broad swash of Californians who may need this. There could very well be TNC drivers, TNC passengers who could use this, and it's there. It is there for folks to avail themselves of. So now, in the meantime, at the commission, we're concerned about our own employees.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yes, and so we have the same requirement. Working from home, I am working from my. That's a CPUC building behind me. We are keeping. There are essential workers who need to actually be there physically. We are in terms of sanitation and masks and all of these things. So we have to walk the talk ourselves as well.
Yeah. I think that's really important, right? To set that example so that people can follow it. The public.
That's right. And I think you asked about is this going to change things for the future?
Yeah.
And certainly, what we've learned is that I mean, one day, I was literally on myself. One day we were in the office, and the next day we were working from home, and we did it. We made it work. We didn't delay on our voting meetings. We didn't delay on.
That's great.
Doing everything virtually. The judges are doing everything, whether it's on the web or by phone. The public is still able to participate in our public participation hearings. In fact, we have more people participating because previously, if I was in Visalia, if I was in San Bernardino in the afternoon and evening, certainly we had people showing up, taking time out of their evening, taking time out of their day to come and talk to us about what was being proposed. Well, now that they can call in, it is orders of magnitude more.
I would imagine, yeah.
Yes. And in those public participation hearings, we've got a court reporter there. We are chronicling everything that people want to say to us, and that is all being factored into our decisions. So
that's interesting. So it might actually increase participation even in some of those decision-making processes.
This is what we are observing, and we're talking about that needs to be a feature going forward, even as we anticipate having in-person meetings again, and traveling around the state to have in-person meetings. We are saying we've got to have this feature where people can just call in.
That's interesting. So that already has changed a little bit the operations.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
Well, this was really interesting, and I really appreciate your time. We are out of time now, but thank you and all the best to you, your family, and your staff.